Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
How are you, Prof? Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, Prof. How are you?
I'm okay. Let us start. Otherwise, we may delay.
Okay. Prof, may you kindly record the lecture for us?
Yeah, I'm recording the lecture.
Okay, thank you.
I'll be recording all lectures.
Okay, thank you.
So that when you click on the link to this classroom, you will be able to access all the recordings. Your module will take us about 6-7 sessions. I'm not sure how we are going to distribute them, but we are going to try as much as possible to make use of our online learning environment so that we cover as much ground as possible. Some of the recordings may not be as live lectures, but you will be getting the recordings as well on this platform so that you have everything that is required. Your course outline develop a deep understanding of research at our level, at master's level. And we are hoping that we'll be able to broaden and strengthen your understanding and application of the research process, especially in data analytics, which is not more of social, but more of scientific. We are hoping that you are going to apply research findings in decision-making processes as data analytics students. You are going to be able to evaluate the various statistical research data analytic tools and conduct meaningful and useful research. We are hoping that you should be people who can explain different research approaches which are available and applicable to business sciences and management, which is your faculty or your school. So now when you go through the objectives of your research, they are not very different from what I've just said. But remember, you keep note of what we wrote under student learning outcomes, because that is what is going to determine what kind of examination, what kind of questions you should expect from the module. We are hoping that you demonstrate a sound understanding of the distinctive challenges associated with research in business organizations. You will find that most of the research is done by data analytic students, are more of secondary data analysis, and that requires people who understand business issues and as organizations that you are going to be working on or working with. Discuss distinct assumptions and or applications of the two approaches or methodologies. You should be able to appreciate the scientific approaches to research and the non-scientific approaches. In other words, I'm hoping that we will be able to appreciate the distinction between quantitative and qualitative research, and critique published research using elements of the research process. Discuss different research approaches available that are applicable to business sciences and management, especially to data analytics people. So design appropriate data collection tools, interview guides, questionnaires, whatever you use in data analytics, as long as you are able to collect data. Then you should be able to analyze, as I said, different data analytic tools. We are going to be using lectures, but this time they are actually online lectures. We could be doing group discussions. Again, they will be more of in the mode of online. So your group presentations will be done online. You are going to be encouraged to use videos. You refer to videos, especially on some of the demonstrations that are required, like use of software, case study analysis, and individual learning. You notice that your module, individual learning, has a lot of time. Online learning takes a lot on the student, because 96 hours are dedicated to self-directed learning. when you are using virtual learning environments. I will be with you just for 18 hours, that means for 4 days. And we'll do some tutorials up to 8 to 9 hours if you are able to do that. We expect you to use the library or e-resources so that you get acquainted with what we will be talking about. Take some time to do the formative assessment, the assignments, which are part and parcel of the learning process. And we are hoping that I assigned 15 hours to that. So as we go on, we will be looking at the content of your course outline. And I'm sure you will appreciate what we are doing when we do research method. The importance of research methods, ladies and gentlemen, is that if you are to pursue your studies beyond masters, then you must pass the research methods module. Then you must pass the dissertation. These two are what are going to be required by any institution that is going to accept you to do a PhD or further studies. They normally ask for your master's dissertation or your research methods mark, because PhD or DPhil or MPhil, if you want to branch that way again, learning, expanding horizontally, they will ask about your master's dissertation. So that's the major importance of this module. And therefore, try by all means to follow it through, and do not hesitate to seek clarifications, because we don't want to lose someone on the way. We want to work together and make sure that we are all at the same level. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have failed to join a class, try to go through the recordings. I record all my sessions. Try to go through the recordings so that in the next session, you will be in a clearer picture of what transpired in the previous session. Research methods is incremental in nature. So what we learn today will be used tomorrow. And what we learn tomorrow will be useful in the next lecture. So make sure that you understand the previous lectures as we go on. I'm going to start my presentation. First slide talks about kind 5300. Much of the blue sheets, the blue slides that you are going to see were informed by kind 5300. I then added on my own notes. So we need to acknowledge that some of the literature that I used for this presentation is coming from other professors. Today, I just want to introduce ourselves and do an overview of research, so that you appreciate what we are doing when we talk about research methods. If you try to Google the term research, you will come across various definitions, a lot of them. We are not going to do that in the interest of time. But as you read this slide, you will find that people define it according to what they feel they should want to talk about. A systematic process of collecting and analyzing information or data, for our case is the data analytics, in order to increase our understanding of phenomena with which we are concerned or interested in. Or the main goal of research is gathering and interpreting information to answer questions. And that is more suitable for us in data analytics, because we tend to gather data and interpret that data. But we do so, as Tuckman says, in a systematic attempt to provide answers to questions. So we may define research methods as a systematic and objective analysis and recording of controlled observations that may lead to the development of generalizations, principles, or theories resulting in prediction and possible control of events. So that is what Westenkamp talks about in terms of how research can be defined. And if you look at the term research, you tend to come across the word systematic way of asking questions. A systematic, that means it's not something that we just do haphazardly. It's something that is thought out. So we need to be doing research methods as learners, as managers, because we need to know how to conduct good research. We need to develop new skills to better understand and interpret the results that we come across. And we should be able to recognize new questions that need investigation. You will find that one of the assignments that we give to students is usually develop a proposal. Develop a proposal that you wish to work on, but under research methods, we normally develop this proposal as a group or in groups, because it's very difficult to come across a research topic within the very short period of time that we have, because it requires extensive prior reading. When you do research in data analytics, we are mainly interested in being objective. Your task is to be as objective as possible. For some of the data that you will come across may want you to try and coin and twist and move in the direction in which you expect, when it is not moving in the direction that is expected. So you just have to be in control. Research is relevant at different levels of your life. And we are coming from different organizations. If you could scan amongst yourself as you communicate, as you interact, you realize that you need findings that inform decisions, because some of you are decision makers, some require to make their judgments, and some require to take action that involve people's lives and valuable resources. So we should trust the processes through which that knowledge is generated, because we cannot afford to trust hearsay or gossip or opinions or guesswork. This is the reason why at master's level, it's very difficult for us to trust newspaper articles or information that come out of censored papers. So we hardly respect people who quote newspapers. Probably the Gazette, maybe we can think about it, but usually we want to rely on authentic data. That means from journals, from texts, or company records, and so on. So you have to have a clear understanding of the research methods from policymakers' perspectives, or from researchers' perspectives, or users of researchers' perspectives. Because some of you may be coming from organizations where you look for consultancy activities, where you have to understand what the consultant brings to you as a research report. So we have got to be aware of the various research methods, how to collect data, approaches, the do's and don'ts for each research approach, and so on. And we need to understand the whole research process to gain vantage point for understanding how research is done, and how to plan, think about research methods, will connect with research questions. We think about the critical limitations and the limits of research that you read. So all those things need to be thought about by us as students and as researchers. So we should be able to get a critical appraisal of other fields of study. Data analytics, you cannot say, I only belong to the School of Medicine, I only belong to forensic science, you come from everywhere, and you may be studying everything. As long as there is data where you are studying. So you are versatile, and you should be able to manage any form of data and analyze any form of data. So in other words, we do research methods because it facilitates the development of transferable skills. We are able to sample, you should be able to design questionnaires, to interview people, to analyze text, to analyze big data. All that can come out of research methods. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, we need to do research methods. You should be able to read and evaluate, as I said, do the research itself. Your second part of this research methods is called the dissertation. That is what you will be doing when in your last semester. Be confident that you are trying to find out a relevant research question or a problem and be able to develop one such question and problem. In other words, we are expecting you to generate relevant knowledge. But in order to do that, we have to be very clear about some of the things, some of the words, some of the concepts that we come across when we talk in the academic field. The word the truth is something that we talk about in general life. Is that true? Or is that real? So that quality of being, that which is in accordance with fact or reality, the real facts about something, truth. It's a consented opinion of several agents or one point of view endorsed by most of them. So time, space dictates what truth is. In other words, philosophically, we argue that truth is not fixed. But truth is always real, although reality is not always true. Some of us might agree, some of us may not agree with that, but that is life, ladies and gentlemen. Larry Carlson says that if I say 2 + 3 = 5, that's a priori truth. Arguably, priori truths are, as Kant noted, ultimately mental constructions, that not external truths, as we can't really say what really exists independent of human mind. Because if you come across your wife on the street and she's talking to a man whom you have never seen, and they are so engrossed into that discussion and depicting or showing signs that these people really know each other, it becomes a truth for you to be suspecting, to be able to suspect that there must be a relation there. So to you, it can become a truth, but in reality, it may not be true because that's your mental construction based on what you think. So we can approach the content and the structures of external reality as sort of limit that can be approached but not reached. Ladies and gentlemen, we have never been able to understand the world. Because as science tries to approach the truth about nature, the more it moves further away. And that's how God comes into the picture. Because if you fail to understand nature, we turn to God. We tend to come back to God and say, this is now beyond our minds. And so God does exist. Because when we fail to explain something, we turn to God. When we get into trouble, we turn to God. Reality is a set of beliefs about what the world we study actually is. You know, it's very real for an African or for a Zimbabwean that a man is the head of the household. It's very real. It's something that I expect as a social construct. As a social contract, the man is the head of the household. And so if a man is not providing, then we tend to query and we tend to ask questions. But where is it really written on paper that you are supposed to provide the food to this family? Where is it written? That's a social construct. It's something that is socially constructed. Because if you move across the country to Botswana, to Malawi, the opposite does exist. The woman is the head of that family. We are in matriarchal societies, but in Zimbabwe, we are patriarchal. So it's the head of the family who is a male. So we always think about the reality as objective and independent of our perception of it. Sometimes it is real. You are a man, I am a woman. That's reality. There is no way we can ever be equal. Reality is constructed by those who experience it. As Einstein said, the reality is merely an illusion until it reveals the truth. So if I tell you that a ghost does exist, it does exist because I will have seen a ghost myself. If I say I'm possessed, I can sometimes I get possessed. You cannot say that doesn't exist because I may be possessed. And it's real to me. So if someone says I'm going to a witch doctor for medication, it means that person's life or reality is within that realm. No matter how you try to persuade that person that no, go to the Western medicine, that person will leave and go to the witch doctor. Because that is their real world. And you cannot argue against it. And this is the basis of why we have many denominations in churches. Because our realities are different, our illusions are different. We cannot therefore generalize and bias the generalizable knowledge about the world based on reality. Because even the law of gravity is different, it is difficult to generalize. Those who have written or read about the Kenyan experience, or we have lived in Gokwe, we have lived in some parts of countries where the laws of gravity are defied. Water comes out, go to some parts of Gokwe. The water will seep up, you don't need a pump. How do you explain it when you have understood the laws of physics? Law of gravity. In Kenya, we actually have a place and a university behind a hill which defies all the laws of gravity. As you move up that hill, the vehicle or the bicycle or whatever motion or locomotive, it will be accelerating the way we accelerate when we move downhill in Zimbabwe. How do you explain that? And so you find that in Kenya, they are busy trying to look at the laws of physics and how they can explain to the people who are around that place. Because they want an explanation, which is not the explanation that we got from the laws of gravity, because those laws are being defied. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we want to understand reality when we talk about real issues. And so we need to be very clear about what we mean by knowledge. Because we can never think about what characteristics of belief or piece of information that we must have in order for it to be classified as knowledge. So knowledge is only knowledge when it is shared. You may not know a lot about what you know, but as long as you have not told me that you know that, I have no way of knowing that what you know is known. And therefore, it's not knowledge. So it only becomes knowledge when you share it. Then I know you know something. And this is the reason why we examine people. We are trying to find out if they have obtained knowledge or if they have gained knowledge. So we go on to think about how people search for truth, how we look for evidence about the truth. And for us, Africans, and most in societies, we rely on tradition or custom. It's our custom. It's our tradition. This is what we do. Sometimes we appeal to authority. Some of us work with personal experience. Some use deductive reasoning, and some use scientific inquiry. So all those things are the aspects that we can use to gain knowledge or to gain truth. Tenacity is one aspect that we use to gain knowledge, where information is passed from one person to another over a continuous period of time until it is believed as truth. Politicians do that, religious people do that, preachers, musicians, market strategists, they use tenacity a lot because they keep on repeating something until we believe it. Jesus is the Son of God, and Jesus is really the Son of God. Is that not a truth? That's a truth because we have been told about this since I was born. Jesus is the Son of God. He was born through some miracle, and Mary is the mother of Jesus. Who disputes that? Nobody. And that's tenacity, and therefore it's a truth. But now, tenacity has no guarantee of accuracy because it's a belief. We have no mechanism to prove that, but we can only prove it by accepting what we have been told. So it has limitations when we come to scientific research. And some of us appeal to authority, especially authorities in business management. You know, business managers, they work as 5-year strategic plans. I'm going to do a 5-year strategic plan. You want to do a 5-year strategic plan for Zimbabwe during the COVID period. Are you sure that theory works? Do we know what will happen in December? Can we predict our situation in December or next year for the next 5 years? The lady who developed the 5-year strategic plan has actually shifted. She is now talking about a shorter period of strategic plans, having understood the nature of societies because they are affected by many factors. So when we talk about authority, a text, I often find students saying, which references should we be reading, ma'am, for this module? And I'll tell you, none, but rely on yourself. Because texts have been written by people like ourselves, like yourself. It's only that you may not have written a text in research methods that you want to read another person's text, but that does not mean they are more intelligent than yourself. It's only that you are reading them because they wrote something before you wrote yours. So when you read them, they may be giving you some information as they become authorities. Just like a doctor would be an authority. Because if I don't feel well myself, I'll go to a doctor. And I'm expecting the doctor to know what is wrong with me. But the doctor can only tell what is wrong with me based on what information I give that doctor. But because he's an authority, even if he tells me that your blood pressure is very high, I believe. And I'll follow religiously what he tells me to do. Because he's an authority. But now when you look at it from perspective of research, these authorities are people who can also change their minds. And that's why we have Sanders, Lewis, and Thornhill, first edition, then a second edition, then fourth edition, because they are changing their minds. So always remember that even authorities change their minds. And therefore, they are not 100% accurate. Because they do change their minds, they change the content they tell us. So we believe what authorities say and we accept that. And sometimes authorities differ and they disagree as if they are lawyers. This is the reason why when you are doing research, you have to read more than a certain number of the references so that you come up to a consensus or to a common position. So when you do business research, when you do dissertation, for example, and you're a master student, we will accept your document if you have referenced at least 75 authorities. That means we are hoping that you have searched and you have reached the consensus about what you have written based on at least 75 authors. So that what you are saying is something that has been agreed by a lot of people. Sometimes we get information, we get to know the truth or to gain knowledge through experience. You know, I have experience. Old as I am, I have gained experience, you know, about how life goes. And if I tell you that, I'm telling you because I have experience in this. You will believe. But remember, what I have experienced is not what you have experienced. Your experience is not what the other person is experienced. And therefore, your experience cannot be generalized to another person. So your experience can only be a lesson, but it cannot only inform the other person. And the other person cannot act based on your experience because our experiences are very different. Think of a situation where you go to a wedding. What you see, what you hear, what you experience at that incident may be very different from what another person at the same wedding will have experienced. But it helps us when you are doing research. Because if I want to understand exactly how people behave in a certain society, I can do participant observation. I will go to that society and live with them for 3 to 4 months or 3 weeks to 4 months with them over 1 year. I will be gaining experience. And I will base my argument because I will have lived in that society, in that community. And so my arguments will be based on experience. And it's a method of data collection which is accepted by social scientists. But then experience can be manipulated to make people believe and accept distorted information and as real knowledge. And therefore, as I said, it cannot be generalized. And some experiences are dangerous. Remember, the person who developed the lightning that we studied today was destroyed by his own lightning. And so it's very difficult for us to simply rely on on the experiences of people. Therefore, it's difficult to transfer experience or evaluate it because people react differently to the same experience. So, and the same indicator can have different meanings to different people, and we should accept that. Then, that's much about social science. When we come to science and research, we need to shift a bit from thinking irrationally. I have experienced, I use common sense, I know this, why don't you know it? Have you never seen it? To logic, to rationalism, to reasoning. You must start thinking about what knowledge is correct, if correct reasoning is used. So in logic, we refer to 2 broad methods of reasoning. Either you reason deductively or you reason inductively. You need to think about how you reason. How do you view your world? How do you think yourself? A type of reasoning that we use in science is called the deductive reasoning. That's a type of logic in which one goes from general statement to a specific instant. And this is the type of logic that we expect data analytics students to be in the mode of. So you start by reading theory, and then you develop a hypothesis, a hunch about any of your research questions. Then you go out to do an observation to test that hypothesis. Then you confirm. So most the data analytics studies are scientific and they rely on deductive reasoning. It's very important that you understand deductive reasoning. Like Axiology is saying, thinking proceeds from general assumption to specific application. In other words, we move from general to specific. So Aristotle and the other early philosophers actually said, we must draw conclusions through categorical syllogism. So if I say all philosophers are moral, and Socrates was a philosopher, therefore Socrates is moral. Resistance training makes one big and bulky by increasing body mass. So Sandy is resistance training. Therefore, Sandy will become big and bulky. But again, there is no sufficient as a source of this type of reasoning for a new truth. That's why we have to do research. Deductive reasoning is valid reasoning. It's very valid. Because we give a condition and then we search for truth. In other words, deductive reasoning starts with a true generalized premise. We start by looking at what other people have done. So then that is later explained in detail after we have done our experiment and the valid conclusion is brought about. So we are concerned about developing a hypothesis and testing it. So if I say in a syllogism, as an example, every A equals B, and every C is equal to A, then we can say if A equals B, then and C equals A, therefore C equals B. That's reasoning. So we are using facts and we are using rules, we are using definitions of properties to arrive at these conclusions. And this is why deductive reasoning aims in testing theories. And this is why data analysis students, analytics students would want to continue to learn with
Ma'am, I think you're muted if you're speaking.
Oh, sorry. The other reasoning is inductive reasoning. That involves moving from a series of specific cases to a general statement. So what we are saying is that the conclusion is an inductive argument, which is never guaranteed because you make observations. Then from those observations, you form a pattern. Then from that pattern, you develop a tentative hypothesis. And then you say, therefore, this is a theory. So, you know, when I say this child is behaving in this manner, maybe this child has a certain mishap when that child was young and what was that. And so when we develop theories, we are basing our observations, our theory on certain observations and the patterns that came up. And therefore, tentative hypotheses were generated and theories were generated. So if you read about the theories of behaviors of people, abnormal behaviors of teenagers and so on, they can be traced back to certain observations and patterns that were made. And that explains how and why things behave in certain ways. And so that becomes a theory. So inductive reasoning therefore generates a theory. Deductive reasoning tests that theory. You know, you are essentially generalizing that all future instances of something will comply with observations that you have seen so far. So naturally, it's not possible to witness every instance for a particular environmental occurrence. So there is undoubtedly going to be instances where your reasoning is not accurate. Because you cannot say, I know it all, I've seen it all, but you are saying, based on what I've seen, this is what happens. So inductive reasoning is the opposite of deductive reasoning in that it is moving from specific to general. Deductive moves from general to specific. Be able to distinguish between these two. Because inductive reasoning is a bottom-up approach. It starts with the specific cases, then moves up. It's primarily concerned with making generalizations that are broad, that are based on specific observations. So, if I pull out a 2RTGS note from my bag, and the second time I also pull out a 2RTGS note, the third time I pull out a piece of paper, I am assuming it's another 2RTGS note. So if this cat that I have observed today is black, and that cat I am observing that other time, I observed that other time is black, and I also observed another cat near this environment which was also black. Therefore, I can assume that all cats at cat are black. I'm assuming, I'm making these generalizations on what I have observed and the few cases that I have observed. Therefore, I make these observations. Again, therefore, you must realize that I can make a perfect induction and a perfect inductive reasoning conclusion, and we should therefore accept an imperfect one. Because if I make conclusions based on observations made from all members of a group or a population, that's perfect, because we have made observations on all of them. But if I conclude based on observations made from a random sample of members of a population, that's not perfect, because I am concluding based on a sample. And therefore, when you do your studies, think about these kinds of reasoning. Because if I say every quiz has been easy, therefore the next quiz is going to be easy, you may be surprised. If I say every fall there has been hurricanes in the tropics, therefore there will be hurricanes in the tropics this coming fall, I may be surprised to go right at drought. But these are things that we do. And think about it when you look at a calendar, like mathematical expressions, like the difference between, let's look at this slide where I am talking about, here is the sequence again. When I say 6, 13, 20, 27, just as numbers, and I can say 13 minus 6 equals 7, 20 minus 13 is 7, 27 minus 20 equals 7, and I'm actually looking at increments of 7. So after 20, I can actually put 34, because 34 minus 27 equals 7. But now think about it. If these numbers are belonging to the months of a calendar, or days of a calendar, or days of a month, then 34 does not exist. So I may end up with 31 days in a month. So after 31 days, what would be the next number? It may not be 34. So that kind of reasoning is called the inductive. We have a third type of reasoning, and in between type of a reasoning between abductive, between inductive and the deductive, that we call abductive reasoning. We are not really much interested in this, but it entails an educated guess after incomplete observations of a phenomenon, which there is no clear explanation. That's why we are not interested in it. We start with an incomplete set of observations, and we make tests and hypotheses based on those incomplete observations. But it does exist under logic when you do study logic. But for our purposes in research methods, don't worry about abductive reasoning. Now, the reason why we want you to focus on inductive or deductive is because we are going to do either qualitative studies or quantitative studies, and these kinds of reasoning are going to affect us. If you are, yes, someone wants to say something? Can I go on? Hello?
Yes,
Prof, go ahead.
Okay, when we are doing qualitative studies or generating theory like grounding theory, we need inductive reasoning, because we need to observe certain phenomena occurring, then we explain that phenomena after making certain observations. So we need inductive reasoning. We also need inductive reasoning if you are doing quantitative research. Because if you are exploring data, you collect your data and you want to analyze deep analysis of your data. The first aspects that you do is to understand your data, to explore your data. When you are exploring data, you are using inductive reasoning. When you now test the hypothesis, or when you do the structural equation modeling, or when you are now doing modeling, you are using deductive reasoning. But deductive reasoning can also be done in qualitative research. Because if you are comparing cases, you use deductive reasoning. So let's not think about inductive as equal to qualitative study, but it is applicable to both, or deductive as being equal to quantitative. It's a way of reasoning. It's a way of thinking that exists in both qualitative and quantitative studies. And we need to take note that these two are useful for us, especially in data analytics, to use. So when you do inductive reasoning, your idea or your reason or your need is to infer theoretical concepts and patterns. You want to look at observations. You want to look at observations. Observations usually, like when you analyze data, when you study data, you want to say, is this data forming patterns? Can I see something coming out of this? But if you are using deductive, your idea is to test those concepts and to prove those patterns. So inductive reasoning is all about theory building, whereas deductive reasoning is all about testing that research. So they do both exist in the two types of researches. Now, when we do research, we find that we may come across deductive and inductive reasoning taking place. If we do observations, we are using deductive reasoning. We generalize from our observations to generate theory. But then we use deductive reasoning to test that theory. So it's not something that you say, now I'm going to do this, then I'm going to ignore that. I gave you now quite a number of examples. So, ladies and gentlemen, there are reasons why, as researchers, we want you to focus on scientific methods rather than non-scientific methods. So, non-scientific methods are not efficient. You cannot prove. You have no opportunity to get empirical evidence because it depends on the authority and the tradition. And so we accept what these people are saying, and we have no choice. They normally come from personal human inquiries, and there's a lot of ego involvement in them. There's a lot of personal preconceived ideas. You know, in Zimbabwe, we actually have a gender-based violence. We have a gender violence policy. Is it what a law? And yet there are societies where if you don't beat your wife, it's a taboo. How can you bury a wife who has never been beaten? That's not proper. You know, beating your wife is a sign of love. That's another society. But how do we understand? How do we interpret that? Because those societies are like that. There are other societies who say, if you like the Swati people, if you no longer wife, you love your wife, you have to look for a man for that wife. You only leave that woman if you have found another man for that wife. Can you do that in Zimbabwe? So these things are very difficult to generalize. They are very difficult to use when you are doing research. Because the conclusions that we use from on these studies are from scant observations and information. And our conclusions are based on our own limited experiences. And that introduces a lot of errors in research, which we don't want. And so we want you to use scientific methods of getting to know to gain knowledge, because they depend on empirical evidence. They are objective. We have a limited range of alternatives before we take options. And therefore, we are allowed to verify. If someone claims that this substance X causes this substance Y to behave in this way, I should also be able to test that. Mix substance A and affect substance B and see if what that person is claiming happens. And this is why we like scientific methods, because they are systematic. Although they are cyclic, they use a series of logical steps, but it's good. Because we identify a problem, we formulate a hypothesis, we develop a research plan, then we collect and analyze data, we interpret those results, and we form conclusions. And that is the beauty of scientific methods. And this is why we expect you to do the scientifically based researches. But remember, if you are going to do a research which is academic, then we must know that you have taken into account the three major components of research. The theory, that which you read to make you understand the study that you are going to do. The methods, the methodology, the methods and techniques that you are going to use to collect data, to analyze data. And epistemology, the kind of knowledge that you are producing. What type of knowledge are you producing? All these three must be understood by a researcher. And this is the reason why we say if you are to do research, introspect. Always think about what you are. No, when you do social scientific theory and research, we give a direction to reasoning. Induction and deduction are distinct processes, but they often overlap. So as we develop theory, we think about falsifications and we point out where previous theories failed. And this is the reason why when you do literature review, always talk about where things did not occur well. Be very objective. When you make your discussions, discuss things at macro level, at master's level. Think big. How is that thing affecting the whole society? So we talk about international relations among countries, relations among major institutions in society, such as government, religion, and family. And this is why we wanted to talk about metadata, our big data. We wanted to talk about things that are at a higher level. But always work with the macro level where as much as possible, because we also need to talk about issues of social life at the level of individual or small groups. We focus on social interactions, how people relate to each other at individual level. Also think about the relatively rare, the meso level, the links that links macro and micro levels, or to operate at an intermediate level, because we need to think about theories of communities, social movements. Today we have social media and how it influences certain characteristics of behaviors of people. So think about it. As I said, therefore, ladies and gentlemen, research has to be organized. It has to be deliberate. It has to answer a worthwhile fundamental question. And it has to use logical, reliable, and valid objective approaches. And this is what we will be learning about throughout our module, how to do that. And in order to understand this module, there are certain words that I have been talking about or just throwing in that you need to understand. Read about them, like research methods, techniques that we use to collect data that we then analyze and so on. Axiology, epistemology, I've talked about knowledge, but we also come across ontology as some of the words that we will meet as you do research. So when you talk about these activities, I'm talking about research methods. Research methodology is about the attitude, your attitude, and your understanding of research, and the strategy you choose to answer research questions. That's research methodology. Methods are the techniques the activities that you do. Those two must be understood. So research methodology is going to be found as a chapter head in chapter 3. Business research methods. At CAT is chapter 3, research methodology, where you are talking about the philosophy that is guiding you, all the instruments you are going to use, how data is going to be collected, analyzed, the ethics you are going to follow, and so on, and why you are doing that. The methods are the activities, each of them, that we are going to follow. And that should be very clear when you do those. Then we also talk about, I'm talking about philosophical orientations. Philosophy is something that you cannot run away from, because your world has to be based on how you view the world yourself. Is your world social or is your world scientific? What kind of world do you visualize? What kind of world do you subscribe to? Do you see the world as being measurable? That is concrete, where you have to test a hypothesis that is grounded? Or do you see the world as bringing meaning from what people think and from what people say? So we have these two people arguing which is the better philosophy, positivism, where everything that exists must be measured, or interpretivists who say, no, we need to understand how people interpret the world. So all those things need to be understood, but it's a branch of philosophy that we talk about when we talk about the issues of how we see the world. Axiology is about value theory. What is of value to us? That means we need to understand the aim of doing a research. What is the value? What are we trying to fulfill? What is the desire that we are doing? That we are trying to meet when we do research? The ultimate worth. We normally say, tell us the worthiness of your study. And the axiology is divided into two parts, which we are normally interested in. The one we are interested in research is ethics. But those who do creative art and design, they talk about aesthetics. We are more into the moral aspect of doing research than the beauty of that. So when discussing axiology, we are thinking about qualitative research and the values that should be known by the study as they report their biases. Because some qualitative researches are value-laden in terms of how data is collected and is analyzed. Ethics about human behavior. We study moral problems, the rightness or the wrongness of our actions. We will cover some topic on ethics. Epistemology is the nature of knowledge. When I say epistemology, I'm saying the study that you are going to deal with. Where did it come from? How did it come about? Who was the proponent? Who are the proponents of that aspect? So we want to understand the kind of knowledge that you are producing. We want to understand it so that it becomes acceptable knowledge. But then epistemology has some perspectives, because if you are to collect data and you have to be informed by an epistemological perspective like positivism, positivism will tell us that if you want to understand nature, you just have to be value-free. You as a researcher has to be independent of the data, and you must maintain an objective stance. I must be able to dissect a human being without even feeling that this person could actually wake up while I'm talking about this person, or his soul or his soul. I can just see his shadow, or this person can start to talk, and I start thinking about all those sorts of fears. These people don't worry about that. They just do whatever they do. And they can test their medications, they can do their tests on rats and what, because they're value free. And their work is highly structured. They use large samples, they take measurements, they are quantitative in what they do, although they can take some bit of qualitative aspects. And these are the big data analysts. Usually, these are the positivists. Because we work with the data, you manipulate data, you model with the data, you predict using that data. Think about the realism. They say we are value-laden, but we cannot ignore cultural experiences and our upbringings. So this affects our researches. So when we choose methods that fits the subject matter quantitatively, but also think about it in terms of the qualitative nature, but without ignoring the values assigned to the certain behaviors of what we will be doing. Interpretivism is an axiological, is a philosophical stance or that think that research is value bound. In other words, the researcher is part of what is being researched. In other words, I cannot be separated from the organization that I'm studying. Usually, interpretivists use small samples, in-depth investigations, which are very qualitative, open-ended questions and whatnot. And what they collect cannot be generalized. It's a case of that aspect which they studied. Pragmatism is an in-between philosophy. It's neither, or it's either, or it's both positivism and interpretivism, where they say the values play a large role in interpreting the results. The researcher adopts both objective and subjective points of view when they do pragmatism. So they can be participant observers, but they can also use the structured questionnaires to collect their data. In other words, they mix methods of data collection, data analysis, and what values they also think about. So you find that positivism falls normally under natural sciences because we are interested in predicting likelihoods of incidences. We are trying to seek an explanation. We want to create social facts. So normally we answer the question, what? Ontology is another aspect of philosophy that we cannot ignore, or metaphysics. It's a third branch of philosophy, actually, where we study what exists and becoming existence or reality, the study of what is really real. You know, when we talk about metaphysics, a set of concepts and categories in a subject area or domain that shows their properties and the relations between them. Ontology therefore seeks to identify and establish relationships between these categories, if they do exist. So when we talk of metaphysics, we are actually thinking about the first principles of the natural order, for example, the ultimate generalization about the human intellect. So if I tell you that a ghost does exist, and I can actually prove to you that munano shikiro, it's very possible. And I can actually calculate to you as a physicist that the amount of energy that is generated when a person dies depends on how that person dies. I can actually calculate to you that amount of energy and explain to you that that kind of energy is so much mc squared, mass times square of the speed of light. Because matter cannot be destroyed, neither can it be created. You have learned that. So if you die, your body loses a quarter of an ounce and it translates into your soul. What happens to the rest? It is converted into energy. So if I can calculate that in terms of joules of energy, and that energy happens to be coming from someone who died prematurely, who wants to come back to do, because they have unfinished business, they come back and they get into your body. Your body cannot contain that kind of energy. And therefore, the first thing, I'm beginning to talk metaphysics. And that is meta-science. And therefore, that is a principle that I can talk about. So I can actually explain the electromagnetic spectrum of that until that person begins to talk, and it fits nicely into the electromagnetic spectrum. Kana asvikira rakuzotaura, it means asvika palast level of energy, and therefore they talk. Once that is done, the person, actually that person speaks in the language of the person or the voice of the deceased. And that happens in real life, and we don't want to understand it. But I'll be talking about ontology when I'm talking about that, ladies and gentlemen. I'll be doing metaphysics, causation, thermodynamics. If you read about it, you will see it in the literature. But I'll be talking about ontology then. So one big data analyst might be interested in causation thermodynamics, where you are more interested in the counter natural, in the antimatter, the realm of life, and you want to understand and predict, and so on. And that can be done by a data analytics person. Some scientists actually do that. And this is how they understand if you put muchairo pado, muroyadi, mvura, and so on. And all those sciences are talking about, they are under meta science. And read about it is an interesting field. But it's an aspect of research that you can do. So, ontological considerations that we want you to take home with is that we have objectivism. When you are dealing with nature and when you are dealing with research that is dealing with certain phenomena, try to consider phenomena as being independent of social actors. It will happen, no matter what people think about it. Organizations and cultures are said to exist as tangible objects when you are doing real science, external of the social actors. So culture exists of widely shared values, beliefs, and customs in which people are socialized. And so culture can constrain business if you are not careful, because business people internalize their beliefs and values. And so social actors have no role in fashioning those external realities. So when you read about that literature, you're actually talking about objectivism in research terms. Or we talk about constructionism, which is opposite of objectivism. Because in constructivists think that social phenomena and their meaning are continuously being accomplished by social actors. People construct social lives. We have a social reconstruction that occurs. So we decolonize African reality. We decolonize colonization. We actually think about how we can deconstruct what we have been learning. In other words, we are saying social phenomena are not only produced through social interactions, but they are in a constant state of revision. What we now call culture may not be what was called culture before. So, ladies and gentlemen, all we are going to be trying to understand through all these things is to understand the research process. I'll not go into the research process today because I just want us to introduce the thinking that lies behind the research methodology. So when you are doing the research process, we should be able to talk about the understanding the situation that you want to deal with. That this is actually your whole module. How to identify and formulate a query or a research problem, defining that problem, then conceptualizing it, in other words, doing literature review, choosing a research design, costing it, and developing hypotheses. We need to develop instruments, talk about how we sample, writing a proposal, collecting data processing, analysis and interpretations, how to arrive at conclusions and making recommendations. Then we talk about report writing or implementation of a research report. So in a nutshell, our research program is going to cover all these aspects when we do our research methods. So I'm not going to go into identifying the problem and whatnot for today. I'll do that tomorrow. Tomorrow, isn't it? Are we meeting tomorrow?
No, Prof, we are meeting on Monday.
We meet on Monday at 5:30.
Yes.
So we'll start from here on Monday. I'll start by looking at our research process. That covers what we are talking about on Monday. Otherwise, for now, let's end it here. Any questions? If you have any questions, you can throw the questions or put them in the chat box. On the register, I see 58 students. 60 now. How many are you supposed to?
Is it possible, Prof, that you share the slides?
These slides. I will not share the slides because they are going to be saved on this link. If you open this link, you see the slides already recorded. Try to check if you can't come across them, then I'll be able to send them through another method. But they are always saved on this link. Otherwise, I'm going to stop sharing now.
Okay, thank you, Prof.